Welcome to BBC Bingham number 14. In the very first of these sessions, back on March the 20th, I talked about the choice of folk songs that I'd made from the choir members' recommendations for the folk song sequence which will be part of our Jubilee Prom in 2021. Since then, the whole thing has been arranged and orchestrated, and this session is to introduce it to you. Richard Joyner suggested I do this, but also Brad Paulson suggested that it might be interesting for me to talk about my composing process, so this is an attempt to cover both bases. Firstly, a reminder about how this piece fits into our prom concert. Our Jubilee concert is based loosely on the format of the last night of the proms, and one of the regular elements of the last night is the Henry Wood Fantasia on British Sea Songs. This works at the proms, A, because it's written by the founder of the proms himself, and B, because the orchestra is the star of the last night of the proms and the choir is just the support act, so it wouldn't have suited us. The folk song sequence aims to have something of the same role in our concert, a substantial piece in the second half with familiar tunes that represent the UK. We aim to have the copies nicely printed, and singers will be able to purchase their own copy as a souvenir if they wish. Cost is yet uncertain, but it'll certainly be much cheaper than buying a copy of a published piece of the same size. You can even buy a copy of the Mozart Ave Verum for considerably more than this is going to cost you. Currently, we are waiting for the cover artist to do the image for the cover, which will be a pencil sketch of Carrickfergus Castle, which you saw in the opening picture. Carrickfergus is the third of the songs in the sequence. The cover artist is Ruth Miles, who's my niece by marriage and sings in the Nottingham Bark Choir. Some of you may even know her from there. Here is the cover she did for my Robin Hood piece, featuring, as you may have recognised, the major oak in Sherwood Forest. The cover of this new piece will be something along these lines. Ruth first did cover art for one of my pieces way back in 1990. So, first a few words about what I think of as my composing style before looking at the folk song sequence itself in detail. You have sung some of my carols and also Under the Wide Sky, and you will know that my style is much nearer to that of John Rutter than, say, of Schoenberg or even Benjamin Britten for that matter, although I'm a great fan of Britten's music. Not so much of Schoenberg's though. I like a good tune, and I think I can manage to produce a good one myself from time to time, though I'm not a great melodist like John Rutter. I like playing about with a variety of rhythms. On the negative side, I'm not very good at musical complexity. I would not aspire to write a fugue or a sonata form movement, and I'm generally most comfortable if I'm writing a piece that will come in at about 3 minutes or less, though I'm happy to put lots of short pieces together into a longer one, such as Under the Wide Sky. As a mainly vocal composer, I think I'm quite good at finding the right rhythm and tune for a set of words, or sometimes the other way around. Of course, if you're writing a song with your own words, anything other than the first verse and chorus will always involve making new words for an existing tune. But I tend to think of my most distinctive aspect in my music as being the harmony, and it's certainly the thing I spend the most time thinking about. Here we see some different types of chords. Firstly, the chords in the first line. These are completely normal chords, such as you might find in a hymn or any regular piece of classical music. The third one is a discord, which only really makes sense when followed by the chord after it. Listen to these four. Completely normal. Normal. A discord which wouldn't make sense on its own, but if followed by, it makes sense. Then look at the ones on the second line. These are all chords from choral pieces that I really love, but they're all serious discords. The first is from Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms. The next is from the Benjamin Britten War Requiem. And the last one is from William Walton's Belshazzar's Feast. Now, as I say, all these come from pieces I really like. I've sung all of them more than once, but I would not be writing chords like these myself usually. Neither, actually, would I be especially happy if all, or even the majority of the chords in a piece of mine were normal chords like in the first group, unless it was just a simple carol arrangement or something. Now the third line is the sort of chords that I like. Firstly, this one, actually my favourite chord of all. Now, like the first chord on the first line, this is a C major chord, but as well as the three notes of the C chord, it has a B in it, which makes it more interesting and gives it a sort of ringing quality. Now this is where I think I'm a bit weird. I just like listening to this chord on its own. It doesn't need to be in a piece of music to give me pleasure. The second one is an F chord, but in this case there's an added note G. Again, I like the sound of it. Here it is just as an F chord, but put the G in and it rings. And here's the third one. In this case it's a D minor chord, but with the added E, and there's something really satisfying about it. These sorts of chords, which are called added seconds and major seventh chords, are the sort of chords I use a lot. However, perhaps strangely, the other type of added note chord, the added sixth, which is used in a lot of light jazz and popular music, I cannot bear. You will often hear this at the end of a cheesy song, like a big jazz hands chord. And although I quite like cheesy music in general, I cannot abide an added sixth in any context, and it would be unusual to find one in my music. It just feels wet and insipid to me. My music ranges from stuff like Christmas carols and my own comic songs, which use mainly conventional chords, like the first line chords, to maybe more serious pieces, which use a lot more of the added note chords. I will show you an example of each. Under the Wide Sky, by the way, is nearer to the more serious end. Now the next section might be called What I Did in Lockdown. Last year I had one small composing commission only. Not unusual. In the first half of this year I've had the most composing commissions I have ever had in a short period of time, a total of 5, including the folk song sequence, which is my largest commission for a while. The fact that this coincided with lockdown has been a real blessing, which came just when lots of my other work had ceased or slowed up. I consider myself very lucky here. I'm going to show you 2 of these pieces as extreme examples of the 2 ends of my repertoire. During this talk there will be times when you'll be asked to follow a score and listen to the music at the same time. I suggest you open the PDF on screen each time when it says the image that goes with the talk are never very important, or you may want to keep it simple and just listen. It's up to you. Most of my 31 years of teaching were proudly spent in the state sector, but I did spend 6 years at a private school in Bruton, Somerset, which used to be called Sunny Hill School, but is now Bruton School for Girls. It was an exceptionally nice place to work. The school is celebrating 120 years since the founding of the school this autumn, though of course the celebration will probably now be postponed, and they requested a 2-part song for the school choir to perform. So this is definitely at the I can't believe it's not Rutter end of my repertoire. Most of it is conventional chords and all about the melody. The words are my own, although I made up a poet whose name is actually an anagram of Follow the Gleam, the name of the school song. Pause here for a moment and open the PDF called the Bruton Song. Even though this is using conventional harmonies, the added note chords are still there. On the word trees in bar 6, here is one. Or on the word simple in bar 17. Or on the word valley, which is like the sort of key moment of the chorus, in bar 22. And in lots of other places there are my sorts of chords. Of course you can find these chords in many people's music. I'm just pointing out the sorts of chords that I really like. All the musical extracts you're going to hear today are from pieces that haven't yet been performed, so you'll be hearing sound files created from the Sibelius music writing software. You'll get some idea of the sounds, but you'll not hear real instruments, and importantly, you will not hear the words. Interestingly, when Sibelius replicates voices, it makes an automatic assumption that the altos will be singing slightly out of tune. I don't know why it does this, because it's never been my experience in any choir that the altos are the lead culprits in poor tuning. So now we will hear the Bruton song, which is called The Echo of a Song. Follow it on the PDF as it plays, if you would like to. Now for an example of the other end of my repertoire. This is also a lockdown piece which I finished only on June the 8th. It was commissioned in this case by the Phoenix Singers, an excellent Taunton-based chamber choir They have their 50th anniversary next year and wanted a celebratory 8-part anthem, i.e. for 2 SATB choirs. Pause here for a moment and open the Laudibus in Sanctis PDF. In this case, the harmonies are still tonal, i.e. in major or minor keys, but here nearly every chord is an added note chord. In fact, although this was not a conscious plan, when I finished it, I realised that there are only 3 short chords in the piece, the very first chord and the 2 occasions when it's repeated, which are not discords of some kind. I'm not pretending this is particularly clever or radical. The piece is more old-fashioned than many pieces written 90 years ago, but only that it is a little more serious in intent than the last piece, which is so slushy it would make some people cringe. Follow the score as you listen to the sound file. Again, this is only Sibelius's approximation of voices. Don't worry if you get lost following this one. Without the words, it's pretty tricky to follow. Now to the main business of the day, to introduce you to the folk song sequence. Just take a moment to read what is on screen, which is the inside front cover of the vocal score. The piece took me between 100 and 110 hours to write, including the orchestration. Most of this was fun, although orchestration can do your head in because it's so much detail. I can't really do more than about 2 or 3 hours on the trot of orchestration. Obviously, here I'm an arranger rather than purely a composer, but equally obviously my favourite chords are still going to be in play, as are many of the techniques of variation which were mentioned in last week's talk. When you are arranging a folk song, the most important thing is not to bore the audience. There must not be too much repetition, but as much variety, or to use a related word, variation, as possible. With that in mind, the 4 songs present different levels of difficulty to the composer. Carrickfergus is a long tune before you start. It is 31 slow bars of melody just for the first verse, so not far off 1.5 minutes. So you don't need many ways of presenting that tune. Suspen Fach has inbuilt variety. There are 3 different short tunes in the song, adding up to 24 bars, though of course this is in a fast tempo. In addition, one of the 3 tunes starts in the major rather than the other 2 in the minor, giving an inbuilt contrast. The other 2 songs were more demanding for me. Car the Yows and All Around My Hat both have a verse-chorus pattern, but in both cases the tune of the verse is the same as the tune of the chorus, and so you have to make much more effort not to be repetitive. The tune of All Around My Hat is 16 bars long, but Car the Yows is only 8, so that was the hardest to do. And as that's the first song in the sequence, let's start with that. Pause here for a moment and open the Car the Yows PDF. As I mentioned in BBC Bingham episode 1, there is a choice of words with this song. You can either use the original folk song version or the Robert Burns version. The picture here, by the way, is of the Burns Memorial sculpture in St Michael's Church, Dumfries. Initially I wanted to use the original words, as these had more of a narrative, but in that version lots of the words are sung in the story by a male character, and once I'd given some of the verses to our wonderful soloist Judy Brown, that would have not left much for the sopranos and the altos. So I went for the Burns version, which is more unisex, if you like. I definitely wanted to use Judy in this song, especially as she is Scottish. Having her in this one also helps with the necessary variety. The form of the song is chorus and then 5 verses, each with a repeat of the chorus. And with the verse and chorus being the same tune, that made 11 iterations of the tune, running the risk of boredom. Another problem is there's no way of turning this tune into a major key from the minor for variety. The tune would lose all its character. You'll see later that changing All Around My Hat into the minor did work, which was helpful for the variety of that one. Originally, I tried to set all the verses and choruses, but I realised that this was just going to be too repetitive. So I ended up deleting 2 choruses, so that verses 2, 3 and 4 run into each other with no chorus. As it is, the arrangement is 4.5 minutes long, and any longer would have been too much, so losing those 2 choruses was good for the length too. So the task was to get as much variety in as possible, and that basically involved all the techniques of variation that I described in last week's talk. One thing that helped here is that the original tune doesn't really know what key it's in. It feels like D minor when it starts, and it feels a bit like A minor at the end. This sounds like a problem, but it actually gave me more different ways of harmonizing things. For instance, the climax note of the main tune, the E that comes for the first time in bar 15, ends up being harmonised in 6 different ways, all of which incidentally are with those added note chords I was talking about earlier. Now, obviously I could go into a detailed analysis of each verse and variation, but that would be incredibly dull. Let me just make a few comments. Firstly, the introduction. I wanted the piece to start in stillness and to have a sort of misty Scottish Highlands feel to it. I also wanted to use my favourite instruments, the French horns, in some kind of haunting intro. So that's what you have, followed by a simple unison statement of the tune. After that, each version of the tune appears in different ways. 3 sung by the soloist with a different accompaniment each time, 2 choir ones in 4-part harmony, 1 with the altos on the tune with the soprano descant, and 1 with the men on the tune, etc., etc. And of course the accompaniment chords and figuration are in some ways different in each verse. I was also trying for a sense of build-up, aiming for the verse which starts in bar 52. One trick I was quite pleased with here was that the harmonies chosen make it feel as if this verse is a continuation of the previous one rather than a fresh start. So there is, I hope, some momentum, rather than the music coming to a full stop at the end of each verse or chorus. Just doing this once seems to give the overall piece enough flow. So now it's time to have a listen to Car the Yows. You have a PDF of the vocal score, but you'll be hearing the sound of the orchestral version. In terms of the composing process, the orchestration came after the composing was done. I obviously had some ideas in my head about the scoring, such as the horns at the start, but I was very much composing a piano part to start with, A, because it needs to be playable by the rehearsal accompanist, and B, because it's likely that in the future, if it gets performed at all after our premiere, it'll be more likely to be done with piano. The full orchestration, if you're interested, is strings, 3 flutes, one of them sometimes playing piccolo, 3 oboes, 3 clarinets, one of them sometimes playing bass clarinet, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, 2 trumpets, 2 trombones, tuba, harp, timpani, and 2 percussionists. The sound file here is far from satisfactory. All the instrumental sounds are approximate, and for some reason the software has changed the sound of some of the woodwind instruments into the sound of strings, though I've no idea why. When it plays back the score to me, it sounds correct, but once you've made it into a sound file, it's made these changes. However, it will give you a better idea than just the piano score would have done. Here it is. So now we come to Saucepan Fac, the little pot. The picture here illustrates many of the elements of the text, plus the fact that the song is associated with rugby union and especially with Llanelli RFC. This was the first one I did, instinctively feeling, correctly as it turns out, that it would be the easiest to do. We have a fast, humorous song following the slow, serious Car the Hours. Pause here for a moment and open the Saucepan Fac PDF. As previously mentioned, it has quite a lot of inbuilt variety given that it has 3 tunes, one of them starting in the major. So although I was not going to present every verse the same, I didn't have to work anywhere near as hard to stop it being boring. What I particularly wanted was a lot of drive in this one, so I chose a quite punchy, syncopated rhythm for the accompaniment at the start. And an even more manic one for the end section from bar 92 onwards. These 2 rhythms are, incidentally, the only occasion in the folk song sequence when I've borrowed from my own earlier compositions. Both of them can be found in my musical adaptation of Terry Pratchett's Weird Sisters, but A, borrowing is okay, Bark and Handel both did it, and B, these are only rhythms anyway. Because of the speed and inbuilt variety, it works perfectly well to have the first 2 verses almost the same, apart obviously from the words. When I get to the second little die section, from bar 49 however, I felt it needed a change, not least because the words are just a repeat. At this point I have put something in to give what I think is a better shape to the overall song. This is the instrumental bit just after the second verse, starting in bar 57. I felt that just to go on to verse 3 here would be a bit repetitive, so I broke things up with an extrovert orchestral passage based on the chords of the little die section and with a pre-echo of the rhythm that takes over in bar 92. In the orchestral version, the music goes a bit mental here. Although verse 3 starts as before, I decided to do a reharmonisation of the chorus with the descant. You can see this in bar 77. I rather liked this, so decided it would be good to bring back on the last appearance for the extra repeat chorus in bar 112. The idea here is simply that if something is pleasing to the audience, which I hope this is, it's worth hearing it more than once. The Dies Irae section of the Verdi Requiem is an extreme example of this. Once again, the little die section, with the same words again, demanded a new treatment in bar 84, so this time it's done with a sort of swingle singers singing bark kind of style. The final version of the main tune from bar 96 gets the new accompaniment rhythm plus a sort of not very strict canon or imitation between the men's and ladies' parts. Then instead of the little die bit, it gets the extra chorus mentioned before, and as a finisher, when it reaches the climax chord on the word cat at bar 166, the music plays about with the 1 chord for 16 beats, leading to a big finish cadence. Incidentally, I only noticed when preparing this talk that the chord I chose for the climax chord of this song is the same chord, though in a different key, that I used from the climax chord of Car the Hours on its first and last appearance. Also one of those added note chords I mentioned at the start of the talk. Now have a listen and follow the score of Saucepan Fac. Again, not all the instruments sound right, but it'll give you some idea. Listen out for the corny wind effects echoing the words in bars 99 and 100. pause here for a moment and open the Carrickfergus PDF. Carrickfergus is a really lovely tune to start with. It didn't need a lot of doing to it other than to find the best harmonies. First decision was not to use verse 3 of the original words, because it's rather different in tone to the rest, referring to drunkenness, and is a bit depressing. But instead I repeated the chorus after verse 2. Another reason for doing this is that the harmony used at the start of the first chorus in bar 27 is to my mind the best chord in the whole of the 4 songs, and I felt the audience would welcome hearing this again near the climax of the piece. And that harmony didn't work with the descant, the verse 2 chorus. When it comes back in bar 83 on the word wide, it is supposed to be a goosebump moment, also unleashing my favourite French horn at the top of its range. We'll see whether I'm right in November 2021. I put in an introduction which returns between verses and at the end, and both gives variety and binds the piece together. I'd recently written an introduction to A Christmas Carol, another lockdown project, which used the same idea of a 2-part right hand playing different chords to the left hand accompanying it. But in Carrickfergus I was able to do a better version of this idea. The other elements for variety are having the soloists singing at the start and the end, and having a descant in the second verse, but otherwise there's much less need for variation technique in this song. Finally, I didn't use the full orchestra for this one, just strings, harp, and pairs of flutes, clarinets and horns. Unfortunately, on the playback, the sound has made the flutes sound as violins, but again, you will get the idea. This one is supposed to be the emotional heart of the 4 pieces, and I expect it may be the one that people like to sing the best. So, have a listen to Carrickfergus. Pause for a moment and open the All Around My Hat PDF. As the finale of the piece, All Around My Hat has to be very extrovert and energetic. As I said before, you have to work hard for variety because the verse and chorus are the same tune, though in this case it's a 16-bar tune which changes key in the middle, so it has some inbuilt variety. Although I started out again trying to set the full 5 verses and 4 choruses, it felt better in this case just to omit one chorus. You will notice, though it is intended that the audience won't, that there's no chorus at bar 105 where one will be due, though the fact that it is just after a minor verse or variation makes the omission sound somehow more natural. So that makes for 8 appearances of the tune, each effectively a different variation. This time I will list them. Number 1, first chorus, nearly all unison against energetic syncopated accompaniment. Second statement, first verse, bar 21, fairly straightforward harmonisation backed by flowing accompaniment in the woodwind, mainly clarinets only. Number 3, second chorus, bar 38, syncopated accompaniment returns, this time punctuated by deliberately heavy-handed flourishes between phrases. Meanwhile, the tune is in the tenors and the basses, with an echo descant in the ladies' parts. Number 4, the second verse, bar 53. Choir all singing, but this time in only 2-part harmony, with another flowing accompaniment rising up and down in arpeggios, this time in the strings. Number 5, chorus number 3, in bar 70, is deliberately 4-square harmonisation, accompanied just by brass, aiming maybe for the sound of a choir and brass band singing on a village green. Number 6 is verse 3 in bar 86, now with the tune changed into a minor key. This tune works well, though many tunes do not comfortably transfer major to minor or vice versa. This is not just for contrast, the words are rather sadder here too. Here the accompaniment is for strings, harps, and my famous 2 horns, but the energy is starting to build with repeated quavers in the cellos. Verse 4, number 7, verse 4 in bar 106, is a more energetic version of the original syncopated accompaniment with strings and woodwind. Meanwhile, the choir uses the same harmonies as verse 1, but now louder. Number 8, final chorus, loud and extrovert, with a new descant and the orchestral flourishes from chorus 2 now exaggerated. Repeat of the last line gives a sort of full stop to this song and to the whole piece. So, now we will have a listen to the last one. This suffers the most from the not quite adequate instrumental sounds. In fact, there are some moments where there's so many instruments playing, the software has a nervous breakdown and just leaves some of them out. But again, you will get the idea. I hope you've enjoyed finding out about the piece and getting some insight into how I put it together. I really enjoyed writing it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what it really sounds like next year.